Helo a chroeso, hello and welcome. Happy New Year, blwyddyn newydd dda I chi gyd. This is my first upload of 2023 and I just wanted to wish you all a happy New Year. How was your New Year celebration? Did you have a skeletal horse come and join you at your door, singing you songs? My name is mhara.starling and welcome to my channel if you're new here. Here we talk about all things to do with Welsh magic and lore. Today's video is going to be focused on the lore and the belief surrounding spirits within the Welsh cultural continuum. Now, this video was inspired by a comment that I received over on Instagram. I did a post a couple days ago where I outlined the various words and terms used to describe magic and magical practice and folk magic within the Welsh language. If you don't follow me on Instagram, go ahead and do it now. The links will be down in the description. I post as much as I can across all of my platforms about Welsh magic and lore. Someone commented on my post on Instagram about the terms for Welsh magic, saying that they loved it, but they would love to know more about terminology that describes spiritual entities, or spirits that we work in tandem with within the context of magical practice and spiritual practice. Now, I'm going to do a post over on Instagram and Twitter and all that, which delves into various terms that we use to describe various forms of spirits. However, I thought it would be worth exploring this topic in a little more depth, because it's a very wide field. There are a lot of spirits that show up and pop up in Welsh folklore and folk belief. So what exactly will we be covering in this video? Today we will be exploring the vast amount of spirits that exist within Welsh folklore and folk belief. We will examine Welsh terminology for spirits, what we call spirits within the Welsh language. We will also discuss briefly what constitutes as a spirit and how do we define the various spirits that we come across in Welsh lore. For example, are fairies spirits? Before we dive right into the topic at hand, I thought it was worth giving a little bit of a warning. This is not going to be a comprehensive guide. This is merely going to be an introductory video to give you a little bit of an insight into Welsh folklore and the beliefs surrounding spirits within our lore. Also, if you have an interest in Welsh ghosts and Welsh spirits in general, I very much recommend going to follow Dr. Delyth Badder over on Twitter and elsewhere. I will link their work down below. And without further ado, let's get started. Now, the first place I want to start is the word ysbryd. Now, if you were to look up on Google Translate or in an English to Welsh dictionary, what is the word spirit in Welsh, it will tell you that the Welsh word for spirit is ysbryd. Ysbryd. As you can probably ascertain from just looking at the word ysbryd, ysbryd shares a similar etymology to words such as spirit and esprit. Now, ysbryd as a Welsh term is very, very broad. It covers a vast array of different entities and ideas and concepts. It's not as simple as ysbryd means ghost or ysbryd means spirit. It has so many varied definitions. It has become essentially a catch-all term similar to the English word spirit. So for example, when we're talking about the word spirit in English, you could be talking about the Holy Spirit, God himself. You could be talking about various other deities from other religions and backgrounds. You could be talking about the spirits of the dead, the spirits of the land. You could be talking about the spirit of a thing. And that's exactly the same for the Welsh word ysbryd. So not only can it denote a literal ghost or a spectre or an apparition of an entity that has passed away and is now appearing before you, it can also denote the spirit of place, the spirit of the natural world. It can denote the spirit of a thing, such as the inspiring spirit within and such. So it can be a concept, it can be a literal thing, it can be a varied amount of things. So if we are to look at the actual definition of the word ysbryd in the Welsh language by looking at the Gair Prifysgol Cymru, the University of Wales dictionary, we see that ysbryd is defined as spirit, soul, spirit, ghost, spectre, genius, volition, temperament, disposition, mood, emotion, feeling, liveliness, vivacity, breath. So there's a lot of definitions there for the word ysbryd. Not only can it mean literally a ghost or a spectre, but it can also be a feeling, a sensation, a breath. So the word ysbryd is actually quite a very good catch-all for any and all entities that are spectral in nature, or for just the word spirit in English can be used in the same manner, a spirit. So for example, we might have various types of spirits. You might have the spirits of a dead person, or you might have the spirit of a place, but they are all ysbrydion. They're just different spirits. So we've got ysbryd and the plural is ysbrydion. At the end of this video, I will do a little glossary of the top terms to describe various spirits. But anyway, moving on, to understand spirits within a Welsh context, you have to understand that there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of different types of spirits as well. And there are even entities which we cannot fully contextualize as being either spirit or not spirit. One has to question, what exactly is a spirit? Are we spirits? Are we spirits within a physical form? Is everything around us inspirited? Do we live in an animistic world? There's a lot of philosophical questions which come from asking what is a spirit. To make this video easier, however, and a little less philosophical, we're going to be looking at specifically spectral, spiritual, ghostly entities that exist within Welsh folklore and magic. To make it a little bit easier, I have decided that you can easily categorise, I say the word easily there a bit too rashly, it's not that easy, but you can split the types of spirits that we come across in Welsh folklore and folk belief into three-ish types. So the three categorizations that I've come up with is that we have spirits of the dead, literally spirits of the dead, people who have died and are now in spectral form. So these are apparitions of dead people, or the very spirit or ghost of that dead person coming back to haunt you in some way. We then have the specters and spirits and bogies that kind of appear in the cultural context of Wales that are not dead people, and yet they're not quite fairy either. I think some people would raise an eyebrow if I defined these entities as fairies, and yet they're not fairies either. These are the very difficult to define, the liminal middle ground, where they are spirits, but are they fairies? Not quite so sure. Are they dead people? No, not really. So they have their own category, which I've called specters. And then there's the fairies, and the fairies is probably one of the most complicated categories because we have various types of fairies in Wales, things that come under the title fairy, some of which do not really neatly fit into the definition of spirit. So let's go over those three categorizations that I've created or invented to help understand and better elaborate on spirits that we have within Welsh folklore and folk belief. So the first being the spirits of the dead, and this is probably the easiest one to talk about. They are literally apparitions of departed mortals. They are apparitions that appear before living people of those who have passed away. Now there's a term for these entities in Welsh folk belief, and that is lledrith. Now those of you who study Welsh magic in any capacity might be familiar with the term lledrith. Now the word lledrith, similar to spirit, has so many varied definitions within the Welsh language. The most common definition of lledrith is that it means magic, sorcery, witchcraft of some variety. You will hear it very often in the phrase hyd a lledrith, magic and enchantment, or magic and sorcery. It can also mean illusion, so it can be used to describe stage magic, so illusionary things. However, one definition of the word lledrith that really interests me is that it can also describe the spirits of the dead. It can also describe apparitions of departed mortals. So within a Welsh context, we could classify this categorization as lledrith or drychiolaeth. Now, drychiolaeth is a fun word, and it just literally means apparition. It's an apparition of something. So why did the spirits of the dead come back? What purpose did they have to come back in folklore? Well, most of the time, the spirits of the dead come back with a specific purpose in mind. So they usually come to warn people of things, they come to enact out revenge, or they act as almost omens of things to come. So the spirits of departed mortals wouldn't really come back for no reason at all, except maybe on Halloween, Galan Gaeaf, Norse Galan Gaeaf, the eve of winter, where it was said that a ghost would be visible at every stile, the spirits of the dead would walk among the living. But other than that, spirits of the dead don't really appear unless usually there's a reason behind it within Welsh folklore. Usually they have something to say to the person that they are appearing to, or they are some kind of omen of something horrible that is about to occur. An interesting fact is that some tales outline this notion that you can actually see an apparition of a person before they have died. So for example, there are divinatory rites where it says that if you do the divinatory rite or the divinatory practice correctly, that you'll be able to summon an apparition of your future lover. There's also rites where you might see the apparition of those who are destined to die very soon. And this coincides a lot with both divinatory folklore and also folklore pertaining to liminal times of the year, such as Norse Galan Gaeaf, the eve of winter. So for example, one piece of lore about the eve of winter is that perhaps sometimes you will see the apparitions of those who are soon to die from your community. So you don't even need to be dead for the apparition of your spirit to appear before living people. You could literally be alive and your apparition would appear before people. So to recap that, the first categorization of spirits we have is spirits of the dead, or llethrith, a llethrith. Next up, we have what I classify as specters / other spirits / bogey creatures. Why do I call them bogey creatures? Well, a lot of the entities that come under this categorization are folk devils, boogie monsters, things that go bump in the night, little creepy things that lurk in the shadows at certain times of year to scare people. Or sometimes they are apparitions of things to do with natural disasters and all that. So there isn't really a catch-all term to describe all of these entities. If I was going to call them something, it would probably be bwgan. Bwgan. Bwgan literally translates to mean like ghost or hobgoblin or bugbear. Bugbear is probably the best one because it's a term that comes across a lot in English to describe these kinds of entities. They're these folk devils, these creepy things that reside in our world with no other intention seemingly except to scare us and to cause all sorts of mischief and havoc to our lives. So I like to call them bogies or bwganod as well. And under this kind of category, we see entities that are not quite spirits of the dead, but they're also not really that related to fairies either. They are entities that exist as portents of death. They are entities that exist as folk devils lurking in the shadows, or as omens of horrible things to come, or sometimes personification of illness and disease. Under this categorization, we have entities such as the cyhyraeth, the bwgganod, cythreiliaid, gwrachod even, canwych corff, and cŵn wybr, to name a few. So let's go over some of those and explain what exactly they are. Now, cyhyraeth are these entities that screech and cry in the night to act as almost omens of death. The bwgganod is a Halloween or Norse Galan Gaeaf folk devil that lurks in the shadows and chases people who stay out too late. Cythreiliaid is a cythrail, or cythreiliaid as plural. They're demons. They are nasty, horrible entities and spirits which lurk and cause all sorts of manic chaos for people. Another word for them would also be diavol, which can mean the devil, just in the same way that cythrail can mean literally the devil, but it's also a word for just devils and demons. Gwrachod is the most interesting one because when I say gwrach or gwrachod to a Welsh speaker, they instantly envision a witch, because this is what we've been taught, that gwrachod are witches or hags. However, when you look at Welsh folklore, a lot of gwrachod seem very spectral, spiritual, and almost monstrous in their definition, in the way that they are perceived in their tales. Gwrach y Rhibyn is a most obvious one, a witch which can cause all sorts of natural disasters, and is described as having large wings and being monstrously large in size. We also have Gwrach Bog Borth, a large, looming, giantess-like figure who has hair that extends down to her feet, and when she breathes on people's houses or on people, they instantly fall ill. She acts as almost a personification of an illness or a disease. So they don't quite match what we think of when we think of witches, but they do act as sort of bringers of death, bringers of misfortune, bringers of natural disaster. We have the Canwych Corff, which is a flame-like light that glows and moves along the funeral pathway of a person who is destined to die. So a Canwych Corff is a death portent. And we could do a whole video just on death portents within the Welsh cultural continuum, because there's a lot. But a Canwych Corff is probably one of the most well-known ones. They are lights that flicker and they move along the trajectory of when the person dies, their body would be taken in order to be buried. Sometimes they are carried by a skull or a skeletal hand or an apparition of a person. But mostly they are just little bluish flames, and they glow blue probably because they are the fires of hell themselves. Then we have the Cŵn Whipir. So Cŵn Whipir are air dogs or sky dogs, and they have a similar background to the concept of the Cŵn and Novan, the dogs of the otherworld. The Cŵn Whipir ride through the night sky, howling and groaning and barking and making all sorts of noise. They ride on storms, and it was said that the further away you felt the noise was, the closer they actually were, and the closer you heard the noise, the further away they actually were. And they also act as death portents. So the spirits in this category almost act as an omen of something to come, whether that is death, whether that is illness, or whether that is natural disaster. They seem to act as omens of what is coming. And as I said, this is not in any way a comprehensive list. There's so many more, especially when it comes to the category of death portents, of omens of death. We have so many of them, so do let me know if you'd like a video just on that topic. Then we have another typing of spirit, which would be a bit contentious really for me to say as spirits, and that is fairies. So what comes under fairies? Well, I've already done a whole video on fairies within the Welsh Cultural Continuum. I will be doing an update to this video because I rewatched that video recently and there's a lot of things in it that I do not agree with anymore. So I will be doing a part 2 to that video, so stay tuned for that. Fairies are entities that are difficult to pin down, and we have to ask the question, are they really spirits? So for example, in that video that I made about Welsh fairies and fairy beliefs, I said that fairies can kind of be neatly compartmentalised into two categories, and that is the spectral and the corporeal, that is, those who are non-spirit-like and those who are spirit-like. And that categorization comes from authors such as Sir John Rhys, who noted that if you read Welsh folklore, sometimes fairies are spirit-like in nature. They are spectral, they can move through objects, they can vanish in a moment's notice, they are almost like apparitions that appear before you. Whereas other times they're not, they are physical like us. We can mate with them, we can have relationships with them, we can touch them, we can have all sorts of conversations with them. They are conscious, they are alive, and they are physical and corporeal just as we are. So that categorization of them being neatly compartmentalized into corporeal and non-corporeal beings is very common within 18th and 19th century scholarship surrounding Welsh folklore. But I don't really agree with it much anymore, and I'll elaborate on that in my part 2 about fairies. But the thing is, fairies are complex because we do have entities such as the Delyth Badder and the Bendith, people who come from the otherworld, the denizens of the otherworld, who are corporeal and physical just as we are. They look just like us. It's something that I said recently in a video, in a post that I did, not a video, in a post that I did over on Twitter, where I said, I always find it fascinating how people always kind of associate fairies with highly beautiful, highly glamorized models with pointy ears and white hair, who are always very thin and petite and gorgeous and tall. And yet, fairies in Welsh folklore are so varied in their appearance. They do not have one specific way of looking. They're not all beautiful. Some of them are fat old men. Some of them are short little old ladies. Some of them are very tall looming gentlemen. Some of them are creepy looking. Some of them are very ethereal looking. It's very diverse in the way that they're described. However, one thing is certain, some of them are corporeal and can touch and can do things that a spiritual or spectral entity would not be able to do. So there is the question of, do they class as spirits? So I suppose rather than there are the corporeal and there are the ethereal or the spectral forms of fairies, I would best say that there are two types of fairies, and that is the denizens of the otherworld, the actual people who live in the otherworld, who come from the otherworld, and then there are those who seem to be much more rooted in our world, such as the Ellyll, the Goblins, the Puca, and the bwganod. And these entities, whether or not you class them as purely spirit is up to you. I see them as sort of liminal in nature. They're not spirits, but they're not spirits either, if that makes sense. They act like spirits sometimes. Sometimes they are just a voice or a noise, such as the case with bwganod and Goblins. Sometimes a bwbach will not physically manifest in front of people. Sometimes they'll just hear them speaking, or they'll see their effects on the house. Goblins are the same. Sometimes Goblins do not have a physical form. The Goblins are only known about because they are in the mines. I should probably elaborate. Bwganod are household spirits, and Goblins are the spirits of the mines. So they are spirits and fairies that live in the mines, whereas bwganod are spirits and fairies that live in the house. And sometimes they have a physical form, sometimes they do not. Goblins are said to be known by the fact that you can hear their phantom pickaxes and shovels chipping away at the earth. You can hear the ding, ding, ding of phantom mines underneath the earth. Bwganod are sometimes known because they will shout all sorts of unruly things at you if you keep your house messy. Puca is another entity which acts like a spirit sometimes, and sometimes acts like a physical being, and they are little mischievous entities that live in the landscape, and they cause all sorts of wanton chaos and mischief, especially to people of the church and people who take themselves too seriously. Ellyll, similarly, are described very variedly. So when I say the word Ellyll, people who understand and have a kind of understanding of Welsh folklore and folk belief will have different reactions to the word Ellyll. Some people will hear the word Ellyll and they'll think, oh, ethereal elves that dance on the flower petals and come out in the midsummer nights. Whereas others will hear the word Ellyll and they will go, horrible, nasty demons and phantoms that lurk in the shadows and at ruins of places and cause all sorts of chaos that you do not want to mess with. And there's everything in between as well. There's some people who just see them as both good and bad. So there's a varied kind of response, and that makes sense because when you look up Ellyll in the dictionary, in a Welsh dictionary, it will come up with so many definitions of what an Ellyll is, going from phantoms and demons to elves and fairies. But one thing is certain, when you read the lore surrounding Ellyll, they seem to be very rooted in this world, in this domain. They're not quite otherworldly. They don't come from the otherworld. And yet they are not quite of this earth either. They're liminal entities. They're something between us and the incorporeal. They're that between place. But Ellyll specifically are very rooted in the natural world. So when you read old poems about the Ellyll, or when you read old folk tales about the Ellyll, they're usually attached to physical places and to physical things, such as trees and hollows and pools and the sort, marshes and bogs. They are associated with the natural world. And I know there's a lot of people who will say that the concept of fairies being nature spirits purely comes from the Theosophical Society and from New Age spirituality. But the Ellyll, kind of all the way back to rather early Welsh poetry, are somewhat described as nature spirits. Sleeping in every hollow and in every bush and in every pool, they reside within the natural world. And I'm not sure if they're quite personifications of the natural world, but they definitely are entities which are highly attached to to the natural world. So eich and coblynau and bwganod are words that we can use to describe the various spirits of place. So for example, coblynau are spirits that are specifically attached to mines. Bwganod are spirits that are quite essentially attached to the household, and eich are seemingly attached to the natural world, to the wild places. The denizens of the other world, the people who come through the lakes and marry mortals, they're not very spirit-like in nature because they live normal, corporeal, almost mortal lives in a lot of their tales. They're just as diverse in the way that they look and the way that they act as we are, as humans, and they are physical in nature, they're not spectral. So it's a bit of a debate about whether or not fairies are spirits or are not spirits. The thing is, fairy lore is full of such contradiction that are they spirits? Yes. And no. And that's how complicated it is. Now, let me reiterate again as we wind down to the end of this video. These categorizations that I have just invented on the spot, those three kind of types or groupings, they're not anything official. And they're a lot more kind of flimsy and nuanced and wibbly wobbly than I'm making them out to be. The thing is, these are feeble, modern, mortal attempts to understand these entities on a greater level. There is no categorization, there is no chart, like there's no hierarchy that I've drawn this from. This is purely my invention. It's just a way to try and better understand spirits as spirits of the dead, and then we have fairies or spirits of the natural world, and then we also have these phantoms and bwganod or bogies that exist as well, which are something in between those two entities. But the lines are not as clear as that might make it out to be. So yes, echechon or echich, they are spirits that reside in every hollow according to some sources, but they're also phantoms and demons in others. So where do they lie? Are they fairies? Are they bogies and bwganod? Are they Cathraliaid? Yes and no. So it's not as clear-cut as those three categorizations, and I just want to really emphasize that I've just made up that three categorization system just to try and make it easier to understand. But it's a lot more wibbly wobbly and nuanced than that is. The truth of the matter is, it's not easy for us as physical entities to really quantify and fully understand the unseen realms, and that's okay, but we can do our best, like what I'm doing with these three categorizations. So that brings us to the end of a little bit of a discussion on the types of spirits, but let's do a little bit of a roundup and a glossary of some of the most important terms. So I'll put the words on the screen now, and here are some words that you can use to describe different spirits within the Welsh cultural continuum. So we have ysbryd, singular, and the plural being ysbrydion. Ysbryd, ysbrydion. So this is a catch-all term that just means spirit, and it can be related to the spirits of the dead, the spirits of the land, the spirits of the natural world. It can also just be a concept, such as free spirit and things like that, but it just means spirit. Then we have bodau goruwch naturiol. Oh, that's a good word. Goruwch naturiol. Bodau just means beings. Bodau means beings, whereas goruwch naturiol means supernatural. Supernatural. Bodau goruwch naturiol, supernatural entities or beings. We have the word arallfydol or arallfyd, which just means otherworld and otherworldly. So you could also say bodau arallfydol, otherworldly entities. Then we have bwgan or bwganod, plural. Bwgan and bwganod. And these describe kind of folk devils and bogies and death portents and all these nasty, horrible things that people really did not want to see at one point in history. So bwgan and bwganod. We have lledrith, which can mean magic, sorcery, enchantment, but can also mean apparition or ghost. And then we have this word, drychiolaeth, which means apparition. So those are just a few words that you can use to describe the spectral plane within a Welsh cultural context. Thank you so much for joining me today in this little exploration, this quick little introduction to the spirits of Welsh folklore and folk belief. As I said, not a comprehensive guide, not a comprehensive list, just an introduction to the various amounts of spirits that exist within the Welsh cultural continuum. If you'd like to learn more about any of these subjects, if you'd like me to do a video delving deeper into any specific thing that I talked about, then do let me know. For example, I'm very curious if anybody would be interested in a video specifically on death portents and omens within the Welsh cultural continuum. If you'd like to learn more from me, then head over to my Patreon. It is my patrons that keep me going, that keep me able to make videos like this, to write more books, to put more things out into the world. You can join for as little as £1 a month, all the way up to £10 a month. You get access to exclusive content which isn't posted anywhere else, and you also get access to me because I have a Discord server and a Facebook group, and there's also a chat option on Patreon, so you can come and chat to me as much as you want. We have so much fun in my Patreon Discord server and on our live streams and such, so if it's something that interests you and you want to support me in my endeavour to keep Welsh magical tradition alive through the interwebs and various other forms of media, then come and join us on my Patreon. I will see you next time, and I'm hoping that my uploads will be a little bit more regular this year. I am so sorry that my uploads are always so sporadic. I'm a very busy person. I'm also a person that gets overwhelmed very easily with things going on, and so I try and do as much as I can, but I can only do as much as I can. But I'm going to try and do better this year. You can catch me across all socials. All the links will be down below, and I also have a podcast and a book, so do look out for me. All the links are down below. Thank you so much for watching. Diolch o galon am gwachad, and I will see you very soon. Bye!